gospel of our Savior, Jesus Christ, according to Matthew.
Glory to thee, O Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to thee, O Christ.
Please be seated. Well, it can be comforting to know that 2,000 years of church history, there have always been some conflicts in the church. It is not new today, it was not new last decade, and will continue, because the church is full of human beings. Human beings come to things with different ideas, different perceptions, different blind spots, different failings, and so we're bound to fail from time to time. It's also comforting to hear that Jesus has some advice for us. After all, if it's going to happen, it's nice to have the Son of God give you some suggestions on how to make your way through it. So let's go through today's gospel, top to bottom, each of the different parts, and see what we can learn and glean for ourselves today. I'd like to start with the very first couple phrases, and that is, when a member of the church sins against you. Now, when Jesus talks about sin, he's talking about something very particular. We sometimes get our noses bent out of shape because someone has a different opinion, or somebody did something the way we wouldn't have liked it to be done, or we suggested something and they didn't listen to us. These are not sins. These are annoyances. If we're trying to get rid of annoyances, you may need to be the first person to go to Mars by yourself. And guess what? You will annoy yourself too. We need to be very clear that there's a kind of a high bar here for what Jesus is talking about. And not only a high bar to get in, but also to reframe our minds around the fact that sometimes people just need a little space. And sometimes people need a little bit of mercy. That is to say, even if it was a sin, if it's not a big deal, find a way to let it go. Jesus, when he talks about sin, he's saying, if a member of the church kills your dog, okay, that's a sin. If a member of your church steals your car, let's go to the 10 Commandments, right? If a member of the church doesn't honor the Sabbath, no, don't do that. We're working on that one. But listen, I remember being a young priest, working with an experienced priest, and I could tell sometimes I did things the way that she wasn't super thrilled about it. And I was so grateful when she just didn't say anything. Because she knew, and I knew, and I knew she knew, and she knew I knew, and that was enough. I was so grateful she didn't rake me over the coals for preaching too long or preaching too short or making some liturgical choice that shouldn't have been made. Things were wrong, but she had mercy, and there's space for mercy. I'm taking a little time here because we need to be clear that we need to give each other space. This is not, today's gospel is not an authorization to rake people over the coals every last time some small thing happens. Use your wisdom, use your heart, and sometimes it's best to just give somebody a little bit of space. What's clear as we go further in the gospel is how important it is to Jesus that we stay together. Sometimes we hear the following explanation of the process we're supposed to go through as a sort of a license for like this rigorous way of holding somebody. But the point of it is not so much that the process exists, it's that Jesus wants us to go to them again and again and again and again. Does that make sense? What he's trying to say is if someone sins against you, don't just walk away and hate them forever. Okay? Don't just unfriend them and figure, it might be my uncle or aunt, but I guess I'll just never talk to them again. In fact, when today's gospel begins, when a member of the church sins against you, it actually says in the Greek, when a brother sins against you. Now, when we have something like that, the translators try to give us a word that accommodates the diversity of the church. But, when a member of the church, it sounds so formal and uppity, right? Jesus is saying when a brother sins against you, when a sister sins against you, when a member of your family sins against you, or your extended family sins against you, don't write them off. Go to them. Go to them again and again and again. Remember when Jesus said, should I forgive 7 times? And Jesus said 7 times 70. Go to them again and again and again. If they won't listen to you, go and bring somebody else, somebody they trust also, so that you all can talk about it and maybe regain that person. If that doesn't even work, then get yourself a larger group. This is how important it is that we stay together in relationship. Because relationship's all we've got. Right? I mean, how oftentimes do we say, like, the most important thing in life is love. The most important thing is relationships. The one thing you can't buy is old friends. Right? Like family, we're blood. We're blood or we're spirit. We've got to stay together. And we need to try again and again if there's a way to restore that and keep that. Notice that all Jesus is asking the other person to do is to listen. He's not saying, when you go to them, and if they fall on the ground and say, I'm totally wrong, I did everything wrong, I'll never do it again. That's not what he says. Because, that's probably too much to ask, especially in the moment. They may need to think about it. All we're asking is that they listen. And this isn't that hard for us to go to them and simply ask them to listen. All you need to do is say, look, this is what happened, this is how I experienced it, this is why it was hard for me. And it's enough for them to understand. I think what Jesus feels like is if they understand, that understanding will start to work on them. That understanding will make them, because they care about you and they care about how they're perceived, it will start to guide them better and to guide them more direct and may even lead them to ask for forgiveness. If not from you, then maybe from God. Notice at the end of today's gospel, there's like these 3 sentences that seem kind of out of context. Like if you ask God for anything, he'll give it to you. And whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven and gained on earth. And then Jesus says, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I will be with them. I want you to hear these 3 statements in the context of the former paragraph, in the context of conflict. What Jesus is saying is if you guys can get together, if you can get together with that person, if you let it go between you on earth, I will let it go in heaven. He's talking about the nature of the conflict. And whatever you decide, or the 2 of you decide, this is going to stay, this division is going to stay, that means that division has now been anchored into heaven. So recognize the power and responsibility you have in this problem. What you're doing together has heavenly ramifications. And if you let it go, it will be let go forever. In this sense, Jesus says, whatever you ask God for, he's saying if the 2 of you can actually pray together, could you imagine that? If the 2 of you in that moment of conflict could actually come together in prayer, Jesus is saying, if you're in the middle of that and the 2 of you can agree on anything, I guarantee you it's something God himself wants to give and will give. It'd be kind of hard in the middle of that conversation together. Should we pray before we end? That may not be your style. But if you're asking for something in your heart, and so are they, Jesus says that's something God will give. He even goes so far as to say, if you're willing to get together and you'll actually have that meeting in person together, I'll be there too. Don't worry about it. Don't be afraid to do it. We think 2 or 3 are gathered together. It's like, oh, brothers and sisters, like in harmony. We sing Kumbaya, and Jesus is there too. It has that truth to it. But Jesus gives the teaching in the context of go to the person who sinned against you and talk to them. What he's saying is when you go to that person who's harmed you, I'll be there too. I'll help. I'll be present in spirit. I'll be present in energy. I'll be present in love. And I will help that thing to go the way it needs to go. Where I'd like to sort of suggest a great place to end for this teaching is where Jesus himself ends. And that is to say that even if they won't listen to the church, what should that other person be like to you? A Gentile and a tax collector. Ooh, we should all say boo. You want to do it? Boo. The only problem is, what gospel is this? Anyone remember what gospel we read this from this morning? Yell it out.
Matthew.
Matthew. What was Matthew's occupation? Was he a tax collector? What about Luke? Wasn't he a Gentile? When Jesus talks about tax collectors and Gentiles, he's saying if they won't even listen to anyone, let them be as an outsider who your heart burns for. And every ounce of your energy is desiring that they would come back.